The clock read 7:42 a.m. when Harold pulled his semi-truck over at the state line checkpoint. He'd been driving rigs across the country for years, hauling everything from fresh produce to high-tech components. But this morning, a prickle of unease ran down his spine. It wasn't the usual road fatigue. It was the sharp, assessing gaze of the blonde officer who'd just stepped out of his patrol car. A single, dismissive gesture was enough for Harold to sense the condescension. Still, he lowered his window, placed his hands clearly on the steering wheel, and waited. Truck documents. The officer barked. No pleasantries exchanged. Harold calmly handed over his logbook and permits. The officer didn't even glance at them. Instead, he simply stared at Harold, a cocktail of suspicion and barely veiled disdain brewing in his eyes. "Where did you steal this vehicle?" the officer demanded, his voice laced with accusation. Harold blinked, genuinely confused. "Excuse me," he managed. "Does it look stolen?" he tried to add, but the words caught in his throat. The officer had already moved, circling the massive rig, his eyes dissecting the cargo trailer as if searching for a hidden crime. "Another one of you, huh?" "A regular menace," the officer muttered, a venomous whisper that sent a jolt of ice through Harold's gut. He knew this wasn't about law and order. It was about power, about finding someone to humiliate. "That cargo has a federal seal," Harold stated, trying to keep his voice level, nodding subtly towards the official decal on the trailer's rear door. The officer let out a short, derisive laugh. "And you, Mr. Driver, can you even read that? Let's be honest. How much did they pay you to lift this truck?" Harold took a deep, steadying breath. He swallowed the bitter taste of anger that threatened to erupt. He knew, with absolute certainty, that any outburst would only make things worse. "Look, officer, I'm working for a company that's a government subcontractor. This shipment is critical. It's headed directly to the state medical center. If it doesn't get there on time, there could be serious repercussions. I don't know what your issue is, but I'm not your enemy." Harold's voice was firm, yet controlled. Ignoring his words, the officer lunged forward, roughly grabbing Harold's arm. "Don't lecture me, buddy. I run this checkpoint. And you hear that chopper coming in? That's the head of the whole operation. He's going to hear your little story." Harold's head snapped up. Indeed, a Black Hawk helicopter was slowly descending, its rotors slicing through the morning air, heading straight for their location. A flicker of hope, tinged with a fresh wave of anxiety, sparked within him. What if the high-ranking official shared the same prejudiced views? Meanwhile, cars continued to crawl past the checkpoint, their occupants' eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Yet no one intervened. "Out of the vehicle. Now!" the officer barked, yanking open the truck door. Harold stepped down, raising his hands slowly. He tried to maintain his composure, even as the unfairness of it all threatened to consume him. He'd done nothing wrong, but that seemed irrelevant that a second officer, radio in hand, approached, whispering urgently about Code 3, classified cargo. But the first officer cut him off. "Forget that. This guy's resisting, and I suspect grand theft auto. I already checked the truck's registration. It doesn't match," he lied, a crooked smirk playing on his lips. Harold tried to protest, but the biting cold of handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "This is a mistake. Please, just check again." His voice was swallowed by the deafening roar of the helicopter's blades as it hovered almost directly above them. The ground vibrated violently, and Harold swayed as he was roughly pushed towards a patrol car. The officer, still holding Harold's arm, looked up at the descending helicopter. "Get ready," he sneered. "When that thing lands, there'll be no hiding place for you." Harold, his gaze fixed on the asphalt, murmured, "I have nothing to hide." The helicopter touched down with a thud. A figure emerged, a man in a crisp federal uniform, dark sunglasses obscuring his eyes, his face set in a grave expression. He surveyed the scene silently, then strode purposefully towards the officers. Harold strained to hear, catching only a single word. "Harold Davis?" the agent asked, his voice clear and authoritative. The arresting officer nodded, swelling with pride, believing his capture was about to be validated. But what happened next froze him in place. The agent's gaze flickered from Harold to the officer, and slowly, A deep frown creased his brow. The federal agent's frown deepened, an eternity stretching in those few seconds. Then, he turned to the officer, still holding Harold. "You were the one who cuffed him?" he demanded, his voice a low rumble. The officer nodded, confident. "Yes, sir." He attempted to flee, refused to identify himself, and couldn't provide proof of ownership for the truck. "It's a clear-cut case of grand theft." The agent's eyes narrowed. "Are you absolutely sure about that?" he pressed. The officer, brimming with arrogance, replied, "Completely, sir." At that moment, the agent produced a small handheld scanner. He held it against the truck's rear door, and a soft green light flashed, followed by a confirming beep. The agent remained silent, his eyes fixed on the data displayed on the screen. With a quiet sigh, he turned back to Harold, who was still handcuffed. "What's your credential number, Mr. Davis?" he asked. Harold, his voice firm despite the humiliation, replied, 3 Sierra, 471, Foxtrot Golf. Emergency medical assignment. My ID is on the dashboard with the transport papers. The arresting officer's face went ashen, but he still tried to salvage the situation. "I didn't have that information when I stopped him," he mumbled. The agent ignored the weak excuse, walking directly to the truck door. He retrieved the documents, reviewing them in silence. Then, he turned back to the officer. "You have just detained a federal employee on a classified humanitarian mission." The silence that followed was deafening, a physical blow. All color drained from the officer's face. Harold remained handcuffed, his dignity hanging by a thread. "Take off the handcuffs." "Now," the agent commanded, his voice as hard as steel. The officer hesitated, then reluctantly obeyed. Harold rubbed his chafed wrists, taking a deep, ragged breath. "Did you know," the agent continued, his voice resonating with controlled fury, "that this man is transporting vital medicines for a community gripped by a meningitis outbreak? Every minute lost could cost a life." The officer offered no response. The immediate crisis had passed, but the sting of injustice lingered. "Your full name and badge number," the agent demanded of the officer. He faltered. "Do you want me to repeat the order?" the agent insisted. "Captain Douglas Miller, badge number 4176, he finally stammered, casting his eyes down. "Very good, Captain Miller. You will be cited for obstruction of a federal operation and unlawful detention. A government attorney will be in contact." At that point, several bystanders who had witnessed the entire ordeal began to approach. Some were filming with their phones. Others simply watched in stunned silence, their faces grim. The injustice had been public, and now, so was the truth. The federal agent stepped closer to Harold, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I apologize for what happened, Mr. Davis. These incidents shouldn't occur, but we know they still do. Thank you for maintaining your composure." Harold simply nodded, unable to speak. The contained rage, the raw humiliation, the gnawing fear, it was all still there, slowly starting to recede. "Can I continue my delivery?" he finally asked. "Yes, but we'll escort you to the medical center. We're going to ensure this doesn't happen again," the agent replied, as 2 armed soldiers emerged from the helicopter and took positions beside Harold's truck. As Harold started the engine again, its familiar rumble a comfort under the clear sky, something within him shifted. It wasn't just the relief of the immediate crisis passing, but the profound sense of having endured without succumbing to hatred. The tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed before now flowed silently, tracing paths down his cheeks as the helicopter shadowed him from above. He still felt the rage, yes, but also a deep, quiet satisfaction in having weathered the storm without breaking. "My dignity is priceless," he thought, and that certainty was the one thing they could never take from him. The video of the roadside stop went viral within hours. The image of the officer humiliating Harold spread across social media and news channels like wildfire. Protests erupted, letters poured in, and the governor issued a public statement. Captain Miller was suspended, then permanently removed from his position, facing both legal charges and widespread public condemnation. Harold, conversely, received a commendation for his service and unwavering temperament. But beyond the official recognition, What he valued most was a handwritten letter that arrived days later. "Thank you for delivering those medicines. You saved my daughter. She was on the brink. Thank you for standing strong, even when the world seemed against you." Harold folded the letter carefully and placed it in his wallet. It was his greatest trophy,